Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Build. I'm your host, Brittany Jones-Cooper, and our next guest has been organizing and working for social equality since childhood. As the former president of Planned Parenthood, she spent 12 years fighting for women's rights, and now she's helping women increase civic engagement with the organization Supermajority. Yes, I'm talking about Cecile Richards, whose New York Times bestselling memoir, Make Trouble, has now been adapted for young readers. And she's here to talk about how the next generation of leaders can make a change. Please put your hands together for Cecile Richards.
Thank you. Thank you, Brittany.
I am very excited to be sitting here with you.
Me too.
Just been a big fan of a lot of your work for a number of years, and this book I love because I know your memoir you released last year, but this makes it even more accessible. And you really take really complicated political terms and ideas and you simplify them. And I think for young readers, but for all readers who maybe politics gets confusing. Activism gets confusing. So I really love this as a resource. Was that sort of why you wanted to adapt it?
Well, I was thrilled that we got to do this, and thanks for having me on because, yes, when I first wrote Make Trouble, it was because after the last election, so many women were coming up to me saying, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to be doing. You know, how can I get more active? But increasingly, it's been young women and young men who are saying, I feel this way about an issue or about the world, and I want to make a difference. And so I hope this adaptation of Make Trouble is really an accessible way for young people who feel like they want to speak up and speak out. And that's what I've been seeing even over the last couple of years on the road. It's pretty exciting.
I think even knowing what the word organizing means, I can't even say before this I really knew what that was called or what that process was called. And I love that you take us back to the beginning for you and how scrappy you were and how you learned to organize. So did you go into so much detail to kind of provide a guide for people on how you can start that process?
Yeah, I think it's sort of like a little bit of a how-to, and it's also, I think, to demystify it, as you say, because a lot of folks go, okay, issues and politics and policy are a little bit intimidating, but it isn't intimidating. And in fact, I think what I write about in this book and wrote about in my other book is actually it introduces you to the most amazing people, and I feel like the young people I meet now who are working on, on gun violence, who are working on climate change. Obviously, we've been all so inspired to see really, really young people as just speaking up, and they don't know exactly how it's going to all come out, but doing something feels so much better, and I hope that's the whole theme of Make Trouble.
And I love that you said they don't know how it's going to pan out, which I think is so important, especially now because people are so passionate and they want to make change. But you share really honest stories about when sometimes organizing or activism doesn't have the result that you want. And so can you just take us through your journey with that experience and how you kind of learned to push forward?
Sure. Well, actually, I talk about in this book, too, my first experience even in college, which, again, is a little bit older, but where we were fighting to divest from South Africa, and I thought it would never happen. And, I mean, we did everything. But then, of course, years later, things did happen, and it really had made a difference. I think this is, to me, the interesting parallel right now as young people I see involved in climate change. And I remember, and I think I write about her, a young woman I met in Washington at the March for Our Lives. She was in junior high, and she stopped me on the street. She just wanted to say hi and told me that she had walked out of her class during the children's or young people's march, and she said she was the only one in her school, and it felt very lonesome, and she didn't know really if that was the right thing or not. But she said then a friend of hers came out, and then afterwards, of course, so many kids in her class said, "Next time you go, I'm going with you." And so I hope that this book is a little bit of an inspiration to young people to say, if you think something's worth doing and worth taking a stand on, do it, because other people are watching and they're going to be inspired by what you do.
Yeah, I think you even share a story about a nuclear plant that was going up. Was it in New Hampshire?
Yes, it's still operating.
But I was so connected to that story because you worked hard and you guys pulled together and you cut through the fence and you were there and they ended up building it anyway. But it's such an important journey to be on to make your voice heard. And so I thought that was inspiring, especially again now because kids want to be active, but they have to know that sometimes it's just the effort you have to put forward.
Right. And I think, as I talk about in the book, I think that sometimes the hardest fights are ones that are the hardest to win to, and they're most important. But the work I think now that so many young people are involved in about gun violence and getting common sense gun reform, that's not going to happen overnight, but it is going to happen because young people are standing up and saying it's going to change for our generation. And I think that's really what this is all about.
You write extensively about your mother,
yes,
Ann Richards, who, if you guys are unaware, she was the first female governor of Texas and just a firecracker. She is an iconic woman, but I love how you just make her a human, like a mother in this. And so can you just take us through why it was so important to show the more vulnerable sides of your mother and the things that she did struggle with?
Well, I actually think one of the reasons that mom was elected governor is because people could relate to her. And she, as she used to say, you gotta take me warts and all. She had, she was a recovering alcoholic and she was very public about that. She was divorced from my dad and that was very painful, but she talked openly about that. And I do think that people said, this is a woman who is not trying to put on any airs about how, tough life can be. And she inspired, I think, a lot of people to get involved in politics. I also talk about in the story, though, that she lost the second, when she, was running for reelection, and that that was a really bitter loss for me and a lot of folks who believed in her. But it's not like people quit, and even she didn't quit. It was, she may not be governor of Texas, but there was so much she could do to make a difference in the world. So I do think it's important to remember, even if you fight hard for something or work in an election and you don't win, you're going to learn something from that. You're going to meet amazing people, and eventually, you're going to succeed.
Yeah. I mean, and that's her legacy. Do you think her legacy is even more important now as we see more women jumping into the political space?
Completely. In fact, I think right now, unfortunately, my mother has passed on, but there was nothing that she would be more excited about than all these young women not waiting their turn, not waiting till someone said, okay, now it's yours, and just running for office anyway. In fact, I was just back in Texas because my family still lives there, and a young woman who was her volunteer coordinator on her campaign a million years ago is now not only in the State House of Representatives, but she's the leader of her caucus. And, a young Latina lesbian woman who is so powerful, but really had her first chance on that campaign. And I think that was what mom always believed in. And I think what we're seeing now is women just taking joy in the success of other women, especially women who've been left out of the political process. Women of color, gay and lesbian people, a whole bunch of people who, once they actually get elected in office, we're going to see really true democracy.
Game changing,
Yes,
like your mother was. I mean, just changing the game, rewriting the terms for a lot of people. Your mom inspired us, but she also, I love how much she's inspired you. And you talk about these big moments in your life, whether it's you testifying in front of Congress or interviewing for the job at Planned Parenthood, and how she really continued to be sort of like a source of strength for you, even to the point where you wear a pin when you're going to face something difficult.
Right, I call it my sheriff's badge. It was an old pin of hers. It's one of the things. It's funny, of all the things that people ask me about this book, Make Trouble, it's the story of telling that I almost didn't go to the interview at Planned Parenthood. Because even that, I had 3 kids, I was a mom, I was running a nonprofit, but I just had the same imposter syndrome that so many women do. I thought, well, I'm not qualified, I don't know how to do that, I've never, all the things. And I remember I was almost not going to go to the interview, and so I stopped in a coffee shop and did what any grown woman would do. I called my mother, and I said, I don't know, I can't do this, Mom, and I listed all of the reasons. And she just said, get a grip, Cecile. This is the only life you have, and you will never forgive yourself if you don't try this opportunity. And I feel like I hear that voice in my head, and I hope that we can sort of play that forward now for women who are, I think of my friend Lauren Underwood. So young woman from Chicago, she had never run for office. She decided to run for Congress. There were 6 men in her primary, and no one was saying, okay, it's your time. She ran anyway. She knocked on thousands of doors. She beat all 6 men in her primary, and then she went on to be elected. She's now the youngest African-American woman ever to serve in Congress. And I love that because not only because she's making a difference, she has a different voice, she has a different experience, but honestly, if you were sitting here with Lauren Underwood, you would go run for Congress. She makes it sound like anyone can do this, and I think that's the thing we have to do about government now, is make it where everyone feels like I can be part of that.
Yeah. In your book, honestly, I was like, well, maybe I should be more
good.
engaged.
That was the whole goal.
I really did feel that way, especially when we got into your work with Planned Parenthood. I mean, you were president of the organization for 12 years. I think 12 of the most public years that they had. And just sort of seeing how you fought through all of the bullshit. It was just like, yeah, you need people in there who have that pure heart and who really want to be there. And so I just want to applaud you for that really quick, because I just was even more impressed with that journey after seeing all the stuff that happened behind the scenes.
Well, of course, it was such an honor to have that job. And actually, I talk about in the book how hard it was when at one point Congress was trying to end funding for Planned Parenthood, and I knew that would mean millions of people wouldn't get health care. It's hard sometimes when you're in the middle of those kinds of tough things. But I remember a friend of mine said, well, just think about it, how many people you serve each day. And I did the math, and it was something like 5,842. I don't know if that's exactly. And so he said, every single day you can keep the doors open and push this off, just think that's how many people got served that probably otherwise wouldn't get health care. And that really helped me, and I think it helps sometimes in some of these bigger, tougher issues that we're dealing with, is sometimes you can't know how it's all going to end up at the very end of the day, although we were successful in beating back that. But it is important to take joy in the small victories that you do have, and Planned Parenthood is a great place to do that.
Absolutely. You wrote about your experience of when they were trying to close women's health centers in Texas, trying to strip away abortion rights. And I look at what's happening in Louisiana right now, and it seems very similar. So even if you're fighting those battles, you have to be prepared to fight them over and over again. What are your thoughts on what's going on in Louisiana and what people can do to just sort of raise awareness about how they're slowly kind of like stripping away abortion centers across the United States?
Well, I think it's just so important, one, that people keep in touch, that they support women all across the country that are in these battles, because it can feel very lonesome when you live in places like Louisiana or Texas. But obviously the most important thing you can do is vote. I mean, the reasons why women in particular and young people are losing access to health care is not because we don't know how to provide great health care in this country. We do. We have the money to do it. We have the expertise to do it. We don't have the political will to do it. And so I think one of the most important things about the next 12 months in this country is making sure we think about who's in office and whether they actually are going to stand to advance folks' rights, whether it's to vote, whether it's to access reproductive health care, and for goodness sakes, as I say, marching is great, calling your member of Congress is important, showing up at town hall meetings, but voting, that's ultimately the most important, and what I hope everyone remembers to do.
Which is why supermajority is so important. Yeah. Can you just take us through some of the work you guys are doing, especially leading up to the 2020 election?
Sure. So I, as part of both writing this book, Make Trouble, and meeting other women, I joined up with Alicia Garza, who is one of the co-founders of Black Lives Matter, Ai-jen Poo, who organizes domestic workers and people who are taking care of children and elderly. And we, with a couple of other women, organized something called Supermajority, which is the idea that really, if all women in this country were informed and trained and voted, we could probably change the direction on a lot of issues. And I think in 2018, women were 53% of the voting population, and record numbers of women and women of color were elected to Congress and to state legislatures, and they're already making a difference, raising issues that otherwise, don't get raised. And so that's the idea with supermajority. It's just, I think if women can begin to organize together and stick together and vote together, we can really make sure that issues that are on the minds of women in this country get dealt with. But I think kind of back to this young readers version, the interesting thing has been, I just got off this organizing tour around the country, and we were on a big bus, and we drove all through the Midwest and all over, and I met so many teens, young women who are already, they're not even eligible to vote, but they are ready to go, and just fantastic. A young woman I met in Detroit who isn't eligible to vote yet, but she wanted to come to a training because she said, I want to make sure that young African-American women, young women from the inner cities are involved and that are at the table when issues are discussed. She was amazing. A young woman I met in Denver, 10 years old, and already is, she'll be president of the United States, I believe. She was amazing. I asked her, her name is Alea, and I said, what do you do at school? And she says, I'm programming robots with artificial intelligence, and she's 10 years old. So like, okay, I'm just, tell me what I need to do. So I think it's exciting that young women now and young girls are feeling like they could do anything.
Yeah, I mean, they can. They just have to be given the permission sometimes, which sounds so archaic, but I feel like with this generation, they've been given permission to use their voices, and we're seeing a lot more momentum. At least that's how it feels.
Yeah, I think I think they have a lot of the confidence, but I also think it's up to all of us that we don't tamp that down, that we support them, and not just young women, young men as well. I think, but it's really important that our own stereotypes about what life was like when we were growing up isn't something that we then visit off on this next generation, because they don't know any barriers or bounds, and they're ready to go.
With supermajority, are there candidates that you guys are helping to connect, or is it mainly, activism? Like, what exactly is sort of, do you want to have?
Well, we're very focused on voting, and actually on this bus tour we invited presidential candidates to come and listen to women. We kind of changed this. Instead of having the debates, which I know we'll have one tonight, instead of people listening to the debate stage, actually having candidates listen to women. It was fantastic. We had, Mayor Buttigieg in South Carolina come and listen to women. We had Beto O'Rourke and Julian Castro. And then in Las Vegas, we ended up with Senator Elizabeth Warren and Senator Kamala Harris. Really exciting to hear women in conversation with women about what they care about. Because I think one of the things I've noticed is that, and I'm sure others have, is that the issues that are really on the minds of women, like the fact that it's very hard to be able to afford childcare, that equal pay is still something that is a distant dream, even getting equal chances for promotions, things like this. These are issues that aren't being talked about on the debate stage, but are fundamental to women's ability to participate in the economy. And so it was exciting to actually kind of take a forum and allow women to be in conversation with anyone who wants to be president of the United States. And we'll continue to do that as we head into November.
Yeah, and the hope is that they bring that to the debate space, right? I mean, you mentioned the book, the moment that Hillary Clinton or Barack Obama can say Planned Parenthood in a very public speech, it sort of helps the conversation be elevated. Right. So I think that's really cool that you're like, this is what you need to be talking about. We're handing it to you.
Right, and listen to women. I mean, I think that's the thing. Because most of the issues that women care about, they're not partisan issues. Somehow they've been placed in these partisan categories, but the truth is, and not only women, but men think equal pay should be the law of the land. They want their daughters to have opportunities. And a lot of the folks I've been hearing from since we announced the book being released were our moms and dads, grandparents, kind of feisty aunts who are saying, I'm going to get this for my daughter. I'm going to get this for my son because I want them to know that they can make a difference. Yeah.
And from your book, we learned that if you raise a kid knowing that they can make a difference, they go make a difference. We just look at your children. Your daughter, Lily Adams, is the communication director for Kamala Harris, which is
right. I'm so proud of her.
Amazing. What is it like to see her in that space? Because she sounds super dynamic.
She's so much smarter than I am. I just can't believe the things that she does. And I mean, I'm such a fan of Senator Harris, along with a lot of other folks, but that are running for office. But it is really exciting to see Lily in that role, and to see so many young women now in roles of responsibility in politics and campaigns. It used to be, as women, we were always like running the phone banks. We were behind the scenes, getting the volunteers. And now to see women in these positions of real authority, we just can't stop. Yeah.
On the topic of Kamala, she does write a nice little endorsement on the back of your book. Have you thought about who you're going to endorse as a Democratic nominee?
I really haven't, in that I think what the role of supermajority is, and myself, is I just want to make sure that whoever wants to be president of the United States is listening to women. I think it isn't. I love that women are talking about childcare and talking about the issues of sexual violence and assault and issues that really have been always thought of as women's issues, but I want to hear the men talk about these issues as well, because these are not issues that only affect women. They affect families and communities. They affect workplaces and educational institutions. So our goal at Supermajority is just to say, let's lift up the things that women care about so that everyone's talking about them.
Yeah, it's just when you think about who is making the decisions, they're all men, a lot of white men. I mean, is voting the only way to change that? Is there any, because how else do you change their hearts and minds? It would seem like there's enough evidence, but they're so resistant.
Well, I mean, I think it is getting equal political power. I mean, women are now 53%, 54% of the electorate. And if we organize ourselves together and we voted together to advance equality for women, we could not only change things in 2020, we could change things for the rest of the century in this country. And I actually think that's where women are headed. And I think that's why we're seeing some of the pushback that we are. But women are very conscious now that, and in fact, our own research at Supermajority shows that women are very conscious of the fact that they are losing rights and have over the last 2 years. And women don't want to go backwards.
No going backwards, guys. Go register to vote if you're not registered, okay?
That's right.
Yes.
And register your family to vote and register your friends to vote.
Right. Check in on your family and friends. We do have a couple of questions.
Okay, sure.
Who has the first one? Right here.
Well, speaking about getting folks registered, I know food is one powerful way to do that, and it's also a way of bringing joy into the work. So I'm wondering if you could talk about more of the connections, and you have done in the past, around between food and civic action or social justice work.
So I think the question is really around food and social action and joy and kind of building community. And I mean, one of the experiences I've had, and actually just getting off this bus tour, we were in 19 cities in, I think, 15 states. And every event was not only a training about organizing and voter registration, but it was also a community event. We had food, we sat down together, and I do think making sure that we don't just go immediately to tactical things, but we actually talk about, as human beings, you know, what are the things we care about? Talk about our families, talk about our relationships, because that's why we're all motivated to do these things. It's not some theoretical idea. And then for me personally, when I have a spare hot second, I'm a baker. I'm a pie baker. I think there is no one that doesn't like a pie. And so to me, if I'm really trying to have conversation or build community, there's nothing I love more, even living in New York City where no one seems to cook. Everyone seems to use their oven to put extra pairs of shoes or whatever they can't find space for. I love to have folks over for big dinners where people can talk, can get to know each other. And I'm really, one of the things I write about in my book is that my 3 kids, I said none of them could leave home. They couldn't go to college until they learned how to deep fry, because if you're from the South, this is a dying art. And they had to be able to make their own pie crust. And all 3 of them do. And so I hope too that partly about building, having your family around, cooking together, I think it's another way of showing young people that there are ways to build relationship and build community and talk about issues, but do it in a fun way that brings everybody together.
Yeah, I was going to say, when you're talking about young activism, I think that's the best way to have those conversations as a family, is around a dinner table or around a pie. What's your specialty pie, by the way?
Well, it is a sour cherry pie. That's my favorite, but I got a lot of them. Actually, it's kind of funny that you asked this question too, because I was thinking of Lily, who you mentioned earlier. I remember a Thanksgiving dinner. It was actually 2 years ago, where Lily she was working in Iowa and was getting ready for the Iowa caucus, and she used the Thanksgiving dinner table with the salt and pepper shakers to explain how the caucus system works. So it was like, this is a perfect idea of how you can actually use this moment to try to explain to people some of our more bizarre ways of electing or nominating presidential candidates.
And I love that story because caucusing is confusing.
It's completely confusing.
And the way it's written about in the book, I'm like, okay, that's what I thought. Okay, that's cool. Yeah, that lines up.
Yeah. It was. No, there's a way to make everything understandable.
Yeah. And one more.
Hi, I wanted to know what your favorite or maybe your most memorable quote is from the book.
Oh, wow. My most favorite or memorable quote from the book. I think it's in the book, but I'm not positive. But it's my most favorite quote for just the times we're living in, and that is, start before you're ready. I think that, and I write about in the book, as I think particularly young girls and young women sometimes feel like, well, there will be this moment when I'll know all the answers, I'll have taken all the right classes, or I'll have the right friends, or I've gone to the right schools, and then it'll be the right time. And I just think that more and more encouraging young women to take the leaps that often young men take without thinking, without really feeling held back, is so important. Even when I worked at Planned Parenthood, I remember lots of times, young men would come to me and say, I'm, really thinking of doing this next thing, or I'm going to graduate school, I'm going to take this. And I remember women would come to me. I remember this one woman in particular, brilliant educator, and she said, I really wanted to try for this job in education, but I haven't finished my PhD yet. And I'm like, just erase that concern, right? And so I hope that, I think the mantra of our times for all young people should be, start before you're ready. And as Mom used to say, what's the worst thing that could happen, right? It doesn't work out, you find you don't like it, you get a new job, you transfer schools. If you can't play volleyball, maybe you're gonna like track. the worst thing is taking yourself out of the equation before you even take the chance. So I hope you'll do that.
I think one of my favorite quotes, and I'm paraphrasing, you say something like, women don't run for office for ego. They run because there's something they want to get done. And we've seen that time and time again, especially with the last wave of women that we elected in January. And I think your book is going to help so many more young women realize that, is that if you have something you want to get done, maybe you have to do it yourself and bring in your friends and family and your community with you. So I think that's such a positive message. It's what I took from the book. And I hope people can pick it up and hear it because I really did feel motivated to be a little more engaged in my community.
Well, and I think that just again, not everybody has to run for Congress, but as I've said to a lot of third graders, run for class president. That's the beginning. It's all the same skills. Once you've done that, you can kind of do anything. And I think that I hope that more young girls will do that.
Yeah, run for class president and then run for real president. Exactly. If you guys want to check out, if you want to check it out, Make Trouble is available today wherever books are sold. Congrats on the book. Thank you for joining us, Cecile. Put your hands together.
Thanks for having me.